So, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me out there? Yes. Can you hear me in here? Okay, very good. Welcome. My name is Shinryu, and this is our second in-person Fusatsu ceremony since we've reopened the Zendo. So this is a work in progress, like everything else. We are doing this in hybrid format, and that's an experiment, and we'll see how that works for you. And we're also doing this with more liturgy. Thankfully, we have more people here in the Zendo tonight, so we're trying out more liturgy roles, and virtually everyone is stepping into something that they've either never done before or are very rusty on, including myself as officiants. So bear with us. Thanks for your patience. And I really appreciate all of your effort and all of your sincere energy. And I have to say, the chanting sounds beautiful in here tonight. Fusatsu is our monthly atonement ceremony, and it's a chance for us to, what we've done in the ceremony so far, for those of you who are new to Fusatsu, is we started out by chanting the verse of atonement, in which we recognize our connection to all of the evil karma that has ever been committed, individually and collectively. All of the harmful acts that have caused suffering, we recognize our connection to that. We are not separate from any of that. And then the second part was acknowledging all of the different aspects of the awakened mind, different manifestations of Buddha. And we recognized that we are not separate from that either. And invoking the different aspects of Buddha. And then the last thing that we did was to chant together the 4 vows of the Bodhisattva to act in a way that is of service, tries to be of benefit in the world. And now this is the part of the ceremony in which we have a chance to reflect on the Bodhisattva precepts, the guidelines for moral conduct. So when I got home from my trip this afternoon, I checked the headlines and I found another blockbuster headline that the Supreme Court has ruled that federal government does not have the right to regulate environmental pollution, which causes catastrophic environmental effects in our lives. And a couple of weeks ago, when I was thinking about giving this talk, I figured I would be talking about the war in the Ukraine. And then we got the double whammy of the ruling that individuals can carry lethal weapons in public in New York against the rulings of the laws of New York State, followed by the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which for nearly 50 years has granted women federal protection for the right to have abortions. So I figured that I should turn to that most recent thing that's come down the pipe for us. And so I'm not I haven't really taken in yet, absorbed the impact of this latest decision about the environmental regulation. But maybe what I have to say tonight also applies to that as well. But when the rulings on gun rights and abortion rights came down, I was interested to see some of the responses on the listserv that I'm on, comments from Zen teachers around the country. And there was near unanimity in the immediate response. And that was a condemnation of these rulings. And there were comments about the theocratic tendencies of the Christian right, which now have effective control over the judicial branch of government. There was some discussion of the question of abortion in Buddhist tradition. What is Buddhist thinking about abortion tradition? And many of the people who commented also spoke from personal experience. And one of the things that's interesting about Buddhist teachers in this country, and this was at least true for the responses I was seeing on the listserv that I'm on, that unlike in Asia, many of the Zen teachers in this country are women. And so many of them spoke from their own experience about having had abortions, or close friends who've had positive or negative experiences with abortion. So it was very compelling testimony. And on the question of what does Buddhism have to say about abortion, there's an essay that I found, which I would actually recommend to everyone. I found it quite compelling. It was written by a lay Buddhist Zen teacher named Sally Jiko Tinsdale, who teaches in Portland, Oregon. And it came out last fall, I think in October, in Tricycle magazine, and it's called, Is There a Buddhist View on Abortion? And so part of the essay involves going through and looking at, she reviewed some of the scholarly literature on this. First point is that there's actually, Buddhism doesn't have that much to say about abortion, according to the article. Second of all, there are very different assertions in the traditional texts. There are some traditional texts which say that a human being exists from the moment of conception. Others say a human being exists after 2 months. Others say after 3 months. Others say after 5 months, and so forth. There's a complete range of views, no actual consensus. However, there is within the Orthodox Buddhist scholarship pretty much a standard view that a human being exists from the moment of conception. This is coming from out of the Vinaya literature, which is the traditional ethical teaching that comes from South Asia and has regulated monastic life in South Asia and much of some of East Asia historically. So there is a pretty standard orthodox view, especially associated with the Theravadan tradition in Buddhism, that a human being exists from the point of conception, and therefore abortion is a grave mistake because it takes away the possibility for someone to eventually achieve enlightenment and achieve Buddhahood. And so, therefore, the rights of the fetus must be preserved and protected on those grounds. Okay. So that's one school of thought. Another school of thought comes out of the Mahayana tradition, which emerged in China and developed in Japan, and which we've received, and which Zen is a part of. And in the Mahayana tradition, there is a rather different point of view, which is a lot more flexible on this question. And it tries to look at the overall set of relationships involved in that situation. to look at what the overall benefit would be that would have the most morally beneficial result for the greatest number of people. And therefore, it's not just a question about the fetus, but also of the mother and the family and larger set of social relations. And from this perspective, abortion, safe and legal abortion, actually is a way of diminishing harm and diminishing suffering. And therefore, it is not automatically condemned, even if on the face of it, it might look like it goes against the strict and literal teaching of not killing. Okay, so, and Tisdale mentioned, for example, the Dalai Lama said that, quote here, he said, "I think abortion should be approved or disapproved according to each circumstance," which sounds like a pretty, I don't know if liberal is the right word, but a pretty flexible approach, that it depends on each individual case. But Tisdale says, when the Dalai Lama says, "I think abortion should be approved or disapproved according to each circumstance," the question becomes, well, who is in a position to approve or disapprove? Right? So thinking about the ruling on guns and on abortion, naturally, the first thing that came to mind for me is the first grave precept about non-killing. And there are clear contradictions here between the Supreme Court's rulings, it seems to me. But actually, I didn't want to focus on the first grave precept tonight so much as look a little bit at the seventh grave precept. The seventh grave precept is the one that says not abusing others in order to elevate oneself, or to praise oneself. And I thought that this precept is relevant for us because as we're thinking about how to respond to the new legal context and the new political context, what would be appropriate kind of action, and what would be action that is beneficial versus harmful. And so I think that this precept is significant because it is about, first and foremost, it's about our speech. I think individually, our engagement in discourse and debate with others, and it has broader public implications as well. So I think it's very easy for all of us to fall into the habit of abusing others in order to elevate or praise ourselves, or to abuse, we all have most of us have really strong positions on the question of abortion, for example. The situation is so polarized, and the conflict is so acute at this point that we have very charged and polarized debate, and actually a lot of difficulty in having any rational, evidence-based kind of debate. And so I think that this is something that we can look at when it's so easy, so natural to feel intense rage or despair for some of us, or for others to feel vindication and triumph, to look at how we can engage in constructive debate and exchange. And I think that when we're in a completely reactive mode, which is triggered by the political animosity in the country, when it's so easy to fall into set ideological scripts, it's important for us to be able to really to be mindful of our speech and the way in which we engage. And I think that can be a way to, perhaps in a small way, prevent intensification of the conflict. So this seventh precept is one that traditionally, we can look at it in different ways. All of the precepts actually can be looked at in a very strict and literal way, like the Theravadan perspective or the Hinayana perspective. We might say that simply don't kill, don't abort. Or we can adopt a more relative, flexible perspective that looks at the overall context and say, well, it depends upon the circumstances. What's the right thing to do given the situation of the mother and the family and one's class and racial and regional position in the situation. But there's also another deeper or more absolute perspective on the precepts. And so when we look at the absolute teaching about the seventh precept, we get the teaching attributed to Bodhidharma, who said, self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the equitable Dharma, not dwelling upon I against you is called the precept of not praising yourself while abusing others. Not dwelling upon I against you. And then Dogen, the great Japanese Zen teacher, commented on this precept saying, Buddhas and ancestral teachers realize the empty sky and the great earth. When they manifest the noble body, there is neither inside nor outside in emptiness. When they manifest the Dharma body, there is not even a bit of earth on the ground. So what both Bodhidharma and Dogen are saying, I think, is that from an absolute perspective, there actually is no separation between self and other. There is no separation between liberal and conservative, between a pro-life advocate and a pro-choice advocate, between a fetus and a human. And I think that, what does this mean? I don't think that this means that from the perspective of the absolute perspective of emptiness, everything just evaporates into nothingness, but rather that everything comes back to reality as things actually are in this moment, rather than our ideas about all the ideological frameworks that we have and all of the political manipulation that we're a part of, all of the automatic scripts that we're used to falling into, and all of our standard ideas. If we're able to drop them for a moment and come back to what's actually right here, right now, there can be a kind of spaciousness and freedom that allows us to act more skillfully and more appropriately and in a way that doesn't contribute to the cycles of suffering, but may help to alleviate. But obviously we cannot just go around all the time operating from the perspective of the wisdom of equality, which is what Bodhidharma and Dogen are talking about. At the ultimate level, all beings and all existence is fundamentally equal. But to function in the world, our wisdom has to function, and that means we have to discriminate between one thing and another. And we have to make judgments and decisions and discern what is appropriate action and what may sometimes be very complicated and confusing and ambiguous circumstances. So this is why I like the Zen Peacemaker Order's interpretation of this precept. They say, speaking what I perceive to be the truth without guilt or blame. This is the precept of not elevating oneself and blaming others. Speaking what I perceive to be the truth without guilt or blame. So without guilt or blame, I think helps relieve us of that kind of reactive energy that all of the political manipulation gets us into, so that we're able to speak just from our own perspective, how we see things. There's a kind of, there can be a kind of clarity to this, which does not automatically, magically dissolve all conflict. On the contrary, a pro-life person can speak what they perceive to be the truth, and a pro-choice advocate can speak what they perceive to be the truth. And it doesn't mean that there are no differences there, but it may allow for some kind of more rational, evidence-based, sincere kind of exchange. And I'd like to add to it that I think that if we add in here not just what I perceive to be the truth, but also what I perceive to be the truth based on my own experience, that can make a difference as well and can contribute to a kind of debate or dialogue which is more constructive. So if it comes to abortion, what is your experience and that of the people you know? Obviously, I can't speak from experience of having been pregnant or having given birth or had a miscarriage or had an abortion. I still have my views about this, but I thought that what I would do just in the last part of this talk is to share the views that Sally Tilsdale articulated in her writing. Sally Tilsdale is someone who worked in an abortion clinic as a nurse. And she wrote a powerful essay back in the early 1990s. It came out in Harper's Magazine, and about her experience of working in the clinic. As her experience as a nurse, her perception of the doctor's experience, and especially of the experience of the women who came in to the clinic. It was written in the early 90s, and it's interesting because it's not a defensive article. It's not defending abortion, because in the early 90s, Roe was already on the books, and it was accepted practice. In fact, most, from what I've read, the Protestant establishment in general accepted Roe versus Wade in the early 70s. It's only in the late 70s that they seized upon it as a political weapon to use to whip up political energy, and that energy was not initially very great, but it eventually acquired the kind of power that it has now and the kind of institutional effect that it has now, and to the point that now abortion, when Sally Tisdale writes about abortion, she has to write about it in a more defensive way than she did in the early 90s. But the piece in the early 90s is actually very raw, very honest. It makes uncomfortable reading for a lot of reasons. And she gets into a lot of the tensions and contradictions around abortion, which sometimes, if one is defending choice nowadays, one is more hesitant to do, perhaps. But her latest piece about abortion doesn't just talk about the Buddhist view, but her own view based on her own experience. And that's what I wanted to share with you. So, and just a word also that in the Buddhist tradition, unlike the Jewish or Christian or Muslim tradition, there is no sacred text which we follow as the truth. And the Buddha said that we should draw our conclusions based on our own experience fundamentally. And Tisdale quotes the Kalama Sutta, in which the Buddha says, do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon axiom, nor upon specious reasoning. But what is your experience and those of the people you know? So Tisdale, just to share a few of her comments, says, I liked working at the clinic. It was intellectually challenging and emotionally satisfying. Every day I was able to help people through a difficult time. No one danced in, no one danced out. But every day I was able to relieve suffering. I saw women suffering with addiction, carrying fetuses with profound defects, living in poverty. I saw women in menopause and girls pregnant before they had regular periods. We cared for people whose health was at risk from a pregnancy, who had been abandoned or raped. I met people who were ignorant of their own biology, in denial about a pregnancy, and in denial about terminating a pregnancy. But mostly I met people who were sad, a little sad or a lot, and clear-eyed about the rightness of their choice. And a number of the other Zen teachers who commented in the online remarks that I saw also said, you know, for many women, an abortion is not necessarily a traumatic event. It may be uncomfortable, but it is maybe a healing event. And Tisdale goes on, I believe that reproductive choice for all people is fundamental to the Buddhist view, that supporting safe legal abortion is a dharmic stand. Equality must be among the highest of our values. Not only the equality of all to realize enlightenment, but to have equal chances to enter the practice. Human birth is precious because it allows us to meet the Dharma consciously and engage in the discipline freely. A human life is the opportunity to confront suffering and karma and change the course of both. If we condemn slavery because it denies the equal personhood of a being, we have to condemn forcing people to give birth. And forcing people to give birth was also one of the features of slavery. Tisdale says, pregnancy is the fluid process of becoming. A pregnancy is not separate. It is part of the body. What is developing is incapable of survival away from that body as a severed ear or foot would be. The embryo may contain all the parts of a sentient being, as an ear and foot contains all the DNA of the larger body, but neither is a whole being. And finally, we must always rely on our own investigation to know what is true. Every human life will require difficult, ambiguous choices. Abortion is not a special case. I know that abortion can be undertaken with all the compassion, love, and generosity with which we welcome a wanted baby. It is an act that can increase happiness even as it decreases future suffering and allow a person to be healthier, stronger, more whole. Abortion is healthcare, and people's suffering will only be compounded as long as it is anything short of safe and legal. So I share those words because they come from someone who's speaking from her own speaking frankly about her own experience, and because I find many of her thoughts to be compelling personally. So what is your experience, and what do you have to say about the issues? I'm going to end there, and we're going to go into the last part of our Fusatsu ceremony. And we're going to now invoke the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The awakened mind, the teachings of awakenedness, and the community of awakenedness. So please engage in the liturgy as fully as possible with all your heart and your whole body. And if you're there at home and not doing full prostration, you might still want to incline and chant along. And if you do, for a moment, let go of all the ideas that are running through your head, and you do give yourself completely, whole body and mind, and with whole heart to the ceremony, you will be manifesting the precept of not abusing others and elevating yourself. And you will manifest the precept of not killing. And you will be living teachings of Bodhidharma and Dogen and the Zen peacemakers. Thank you for listening.